Did Israel just draw a military red line against Turkey inside Syria? And how close are two of the region's strongest militaries to testing this red line again? On August 18th, Israeli aircraft struck the Abu el-Dakhur air base in northwestern Syria. At least 8 bombs hit runways and hangars, hours after a Turkish military delegation has visited the base to inspect the rehabilitation work. No casualties were reported. Israel says that Damascus was about to violate a security status quo by allowing Turkish troops to deploy there. Turkey rejects that claim, and the United States envoy for Syria called the strike an unnecessary escalation. Iranian planners may also be looking beyond the Middle East. According to Financial Times reporting sightings people close to the regime, Iranian forces have assessed possible U.S. military targets in Bulgaria and Cyprus, along with undersea fiber optic cables near Hormuz if Washington launches another major offensive. So these are contingency options, not attacks that have been ordered. And in the Gulf, the United Arab Emirates says that 2 ballistic missiles launched from Iran were aimed towards the maritime traffic. Tehran denies responsibility. Abu Dhabi responded by suspending the trade and the financial transactions with Iran. And in the Gaza Strip, the week's dramatic disarmament diplomacy is colliding with new military action that is taking place. Israeli strikes continued after United States negotiations pressed for progress, and Israeli troops reportedly crossed the ceasefire lines to detain a Hamas police colonel. I'm Yair Pinto, joined by Shoshani, and this is Boots on the Ground. We bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and the truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. At the beginning of this week, the central question was whether pressure would force Iran towards a deal. The 60-day negotiations window has now expired without a final agreement, but the American military posture is not shrinking. The USS George Washington is moving towards the Middle East to relieve the USS Abraham Lincoln after a deployment of more than 250 days. Washington is rotating the forces, not removing them. Iranian planning suggests a strategy of widening the number of places that the United States and its partners must defend. That is why the reports about southeastern Europe matters. A strike on an American military asset in Europe would create a completely different strategic problem than another drone attack in the Gulf. Even discussing undersea communications cables shows the same logic. Create pressure where the damage is difficult to contain. Syria now presents Israel with another version of that problem. Abu el-Dakhur is roughly 45 miles from the Turkish border. Turkey has been helping rebuild parts of Syria's military, and Israel is concerned that a Turkish military footprint there could restrict Israeli freedom of action over Syria. That is especially sensitive because Israeli operations over Syria are central to its wider regional air campaign. The important distinction, and that's very important, is that Turkey is not an Iranian proxy. It is a major regional military power and also a NATO member. Israel can strike a runway or destroy a radar system. The harder challenge is preventing a tactical operation from turning into a direct confrontation with Ankara. Lebanon and Gaza show why the diplomatic language of demilitarization is much easier than the military reality. Earlier in the week, a Hezbollah explosive drone wounded 3 Israeli soldiers around the Ali Taher Ridge. Israel answered with airstrikes and continued pressure on the underground systems. In a previous exposed network near the Beaufort Ridge, the IDF documented a tunnel about 1 kilometer long with 6 shafts and an underground complex built to support hundreds of Hezbollah fighters. A document can say Hezbollah is disarmed. Someone still has to enter the tunnels, remove the weapons, and prevent the system from being rebuilt again. Gaza now has the same sequencing problem. Hamas says that it is prepared to discuss disarmament under a broader agreement. Israel insists that it will not withdraw before the process is verified. The latest strikes and reported detention operation shows how quickly the military track can move while diplomats are still arguing over who acts first. All week, we reported the missiles, the ships, the tunnels, and the deadlines. Now, Mati and I want to connect all these dots. Is deterrence being rebuilt through clearer red lines, or are those same red lines pulling more countries and more fronts into the conflict? And when every agreement depends on someone physically enforcing it, what happens when the other side simply says no? The 60-day ceasefire between Iran and the United States is over, and Iran is already launching attacks against the Gulf states and against tankers in the Strait of Hormuz in an attempt to increase the oil prices around the world. Israel just struck the former Assad military base in Syria in an attempt to prevent Turkey from building military assets close to us. And in the Gaza Strip and in Lebanon, the IDF is fighting against terrorists of Hezbollah and Hamas. So where are we heading now? This is all the topics that we're going to discuss in today's Boots on the Ground with the one and only Mati Shoshani.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
It's good to be
It's been
here.
a while since we've done a podcast.
Tomer Zmora.
Hello, I'm also here.
So let's begin, because this talk is...
Let's start with Iran.
No, I think we need to say that this is sponsored by the Paratroopers Families Fund. We'll talk more about them later on in this report.
Yes, and we'll have a link below so people can make a donation.
And can you say the catchphrase?
The catchphrase is a new... Okay.
We work hard for that.
You're here with Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani, and this is Boots on the Ground. All week we report about what happened, and here we talk about what it means and what comes next. It's a bit long for a catchphrase, I would say.
I was going to say it's a long catchphrase.
We need it for iTunes.
Let's get into it. We'll do better next time. Let's talk about Iran. You gave in the headlines a bunch of really big topics, and each one of them has dramatically changed the region that we're living in. I'd say the headline on Iran is the U.S. has officially given up on negotiations with Iran.
Yeah,
that's
officially
what really
by
happened.
Trump.
Yeah.
Trump is saying there's no talks. Nobody's talking with anybody.
So there's been a discrepancy between what Iran and the United States says for months. Trump will come out and say, I'm talking to Iran. Conversation went really well. Iran, or someone in Iran, comes out the next day and says, it's a lie. We haven't been speaking to the Americans at all. Now, we know that that's not true, that they have been speaking through different factions. Some of them are things that might be very surprising to people to hear.
Like the Kurds?
Like the Kurds in Iraq talking to IRGC officials behind the back of other people in the IRGC.
Behind the backs of the official Iranian negotiations teams.
Yeah.
Because the United States saying that, okay, this team has no power to make any decisions because we signed the memorandum with them.
Yeah, they can't uphold
and
it.
basically nothing is happening. Nobody's abiding. There is still fighting, and there is still many mosquito ships of terrorists that attack the naval vessels. The mines are still spread out in the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, to your point.
The American Strait of Hormuz. I will just say, because but last week he was saying that I want to show you that part.
I think it's a great idea.
We
control it. We control it with the blockade. We have a blockade. We control it with the blockade. And I like the idea of declaring it a territory. We have total control over the strait. Now, they can be a nuisance. They can put a mine in the water, and people don't like having mines hit their billion-dollar ships, etc. But the blockade has been very effective. And, we're taking out, now maybe that will stop, or maybe it'll open up even further, but we're taking out millions of barrels of oil a week. If you look at the kind of numbers that we're doing, the strait is open.
Can we pause on the decor on that? Can we go back to that frame for just a second? Putin called and said he wants the phone number of the interior designer that Trump is
From the White
Trump
House.
is using. Did you see how much gold was in the Oval Office? Anyway, but to his point, to your point, Yair, there was a ceasefire. The ceasefire was, it was a big bag of baloney, and nothing ever happened that was anything similar to a ceasefire. The U.S. was striking continuously and at an ever-increasing rate. The Iranians continued attacking everyone where their missiles could reach, with one really big exception. They didn't dare attack Israel, not through their proxies and not directly. And now officially, everyone is on the same page, Iran and the U.S., saying, you know what? There's no point in negotiating. We're not going back to negotiation, and it's not going to happen in the foreseeable future. What are we doing? Official U.S. policy now is attrition, bleeding the Iranian regime financially, and pressuring them militarily until something gives and cracks.
We don't know how long that will take, and we are hearing estimates from the Iranian regime that that's part of their strategy, to wait out and just survive. That's the goal until Donald Trump is out of office. And then they might have like a more favorable president in the White House.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
I think there's a really false equation that's being presented in global news. And the equation says this. There's a deadline. The deadline is Israeli elections and American midterms. Yeah. And as if at the end of the American midterms, if Trump or the Republican Party don't have this sweeping victory and lose one of their majorities, then suddenly Trump will have his hands bound and won't be able to fight or continue the war in Iran, or the limited conflict against Iran. That is simply wrong. It's flawed from a fact perspective, and it's flawed from an understanding of the American political system perspective. The American government can't, this is important to say, can't fully stop Trump from engaging in a conflict in Iran. They can for a short amount of time, but definitely not if anything flares up. And if you're a student of history, and both of us are, you know that creating a conflict is not very hard. All you need to do is poke the guy next door, and then you have an excuse to go back to conflict, even without support from the House or from the Senate. And two, that support, or the order to stop the war, will likely not come out of any one of the legislators in the United States, even if the Republican Party doesn't do well in the midterms. So this equation that's presented as if it's the end of the end and the buzzer's coming, and if we don't change everything now, it's not going to happen, that's nonsense. Yeah. Trump has 2 more years to continue waging this war, and there's no guarantee, by the way, that whoever replaces him in office
won't continue the war also.
Assuming he is replaced in office.
Exactly.
Won't continue the same conflict the way he did, or to a greater degree. We don't know that.
Yeah, but what we do know is that the United States has multiple aircraft carriers in the region and many, many forces, and more are coming, especially to Israel. I mean, I've been to the Ben Gurion International Airport, and I think you have like 50% of the airplanes there are...
We're not supposed to talk about the numbers. Many of the aircraft...
Many airplanes there are United States.
They're gray and say U.S. Air Force on them.
Exactly, not Israeli planes there. And why is that? Because Israel is the safest place for the United States military to be now in the Middle East. Yeah. All of the other military bases of the United States are being under attack by Iran or their proxies. And the Iranians just now dared to issue a prize of 50,000 United States dollars for anybody who kidnaps or murders a United States service member. And then they also give twice that amount to a woman that does that. At least they're not discriminating between genders.
Well, they are discriminating.
Well, towards the women.
Yeah. That's actually exactly that. It's preferential treatment for the women. Anyway, apparently they've also been penetrated by the liberal woke left.
movement. Yeah. But listen, Mati, what's interesting about this new proposal to give a prize to kidnapped soldiers is that there are no official boots on the ground by the United States in Iran. So who are they talking to? They're now talking to their supporters, Shiite communities, radical terror elements all around the world, asking them to carry out attacks against U.S. personnel, not just in Iran, but in the Gulf, in Iraq, in Europe potentially, and in other places around the world. This is what's global jihad that Iran is trying to push towards.
Yeah, and I think we need to remind people, in the forensic information that comes out of many terrorist attacks around the world, you find the DNA, you find the fingerprints of the Hezbollah terrorist organization. We find that in Judea and Samaria.
It's all over right
consistently,
now.
Everywhere.
In a bigger way, the Houthis stopped Bab el Yaman. We have
Bab
the
el-Mandab.
the Iraqi militias.
That are refusing to disarm themselves. But I'm saying this even from a Western perspective, Toma. Not just the obvious candidates. It's obvious to people that listen to our content that the proxies are related to Hezbollah. But it's deeper than that. And that's, I think, what Yair was trying to say underneath that, which is that the Iranians inspire terrorism globally. They inspire and they create the infrastructure for terrorism globally. They're behind the ideology that is parallel and cooperative with Hamas ideology. The same Hamas we recently discovered was building cells inside of Lebanon to attack Israel together with Hezbollah in Lebanon. The same ideology that supports Hezbollah.
Also from Syria.
Yeah, but also, and this is important for Western audiences to understand, through what people call, mistakenly in my opinion, lone wolf attacks throughout different countries. And in reality, when you look at the attacks carried out by a crazy gunman or a deranged truck driver that happens in a Christmas market or that crashes through a crowd in a European
It's never
capital,
just like an individual thinking, okay, I'll do this today. It was planned, incited, funded, and supported by either shell companies that are supported by Iran or by Iran themselves or a Revolutionary Guards operative that is controlling this individual.
Yeah, they don't limit themselves to country-on-country warfare or to organizations with a name. They spread their terrorism and violence wherever they can spread it, and it includes it, and people need to understand the infrastructure. It includes financial incentives, like you mentioned. We'll pay money, and what that really is a rallying cry to the terrorists around the world. They also do this. They have Telegram groups, and whatever classified texting message that you have, they spread the information everywhere they can to incite violence and terrorism. That's who we're dealing with. That's the enemy that we're facing.
Exactly.
And I think on the bigger scale, if you can explain the audience what it's mean to stop Iran from founding, and the moment that Iran don't have money, what can happen in the Middle East if you look at the proxies falling and don't have enough oxygen to keep on the terror infrastructure and attacks, and how it's affecting the whole region, this export of terrorism by Iran?
Well, at the moment, Iran is basically funding the Hezbollah terrorist organization that is effectively controlling Lebanon. So without the funding, Lebanon potentially can be free. Okay, so Mati, let's zoom out for a second and explain what's the current situation between the war between the United States and Iran. We just finished the 60-day ceasefire in which there was a lot of fire going on, not much seizing. And Iran is claiming that they won. So did they win this war? That's what we hear in multiple news outlets around the world, especially those that are supporting the Islamic Republic. But what's happening underground? Is the Strait of Hormuz open? Are the Iranian regime capable of producing more ballistic missiles? Did they increase the amount of production or reduce it? Are they in an existential financial situation internally in Iran? Or is the United States going to back down from all this war?
The answer to all those questions is yes and no. And I think that's really the challenging thing about everything that's happening now, is that we're fighting two different wars. There's a practical war on the ground, of which very little is visible to the public. We don't know the long-term trends. It's almost impossible to see the real damage taking place in Iran. And then there's a much more visible war, which is the war of PR, the war of slogans, and the war of terrorism. And we need to separate those two things. In the war of terrorism, Iran has been highly successful, and we need to be honest about this. They've been highly successful in scaring their neighbors. They've been highly successful in rallying people around the world to think that they've been able to stop global trade of oil to a great degree, that they are the ones that are sort of, stretching the ability of the American armed forces. When in reality, when you look at the military perspective and the financial implications of this war, it's a very different story. Iran has taken a beating when it comes to their military capability, both traditional warfare, as in real army, and terrorism proxy warfare. substantially weakened in both of those things. But more importantly, the sanctions and the blockade on Iran are deeply devastating to their economy, specifically the war economy and the terrorism economy of the IRGC, of the Revolutionary Guards, in a sense of being able to pay their proxies, being able to pay the salaries. They're reaching a tipping point. By the way, we don't know what that tipping point is, but their economy continues to degrade, continues to break down. Their military capability continues to weaken again and again and again. We need to be honest about this. Here's the problem. This war doesn't end in a conventional way. There is no V-Day. There is no moment where the U.S. can say, you know what, guys? Let's go home, we finished. Not in the traditional sense of World War II or any other war that's a traditional army on army. This is a asymmetrical war in which Iran, until the bitter end, and we need to say this, until the bitter end, they keep fighting and fighting and terrorizing until something breaks in their mechanism and they can't do it anymore. When does that happen? We've talked to all the experts. No one knows. We just know they're en route to that. And they're considerably closer today to breaking and ceasing to exist as a dictatorship than they were a few months ago.
And the danger about all of this is the closer they get to destruction, the more radical they become.
Yes, absolutely.
They are now appointing extreme radical leaders to key positions inside the government of Iran, to the point that even the president is considered a moderate. Compared to the Revolutionary Guards military commanders that are actually controlling the council of the Revolutionary Guards at the moment. Ahmed Vahidi and all these like super radical guys that Mujtaba Khamenei appointed, if he's alive. We're not sure about that yet. But it seems like they're getting more and more radical, and they will invest more and more money into internal oppression of their own people, the Iranian people, because they're afraid of the protests rising back up because of the severe economic situation that the Iranian people are in now, and also externally. So they want to invest the money into their mercenaries all across the Middle East in an attempt to make America deal with multiple fronts other than Iran. One is the Bab el-Mandab Strait, which is another important water passage that is under attack by the Houthis in Yemen that have been supported by Iran for many years now. And they have hundreds of ballistic missiles, drones, facilities, terror fleets, same thing that Iran has. Then you have the Hezbollah terrorist organization in Lebanon that are now weakened because of the IDF there. But they were a big part of Iran's plan to export terrorism to Israel, to Lebanon, and also around the world, to Venezuela and Europe. And then you have other terrorist proxies in Iraq, and they tried to accomplish the same thing in Syria, but we don't know what will happen there. So it seems like it's going to get a lot worse before it will be finalized, if we're talking about the regime. And currently, their demands, Mati, maybe you give us the list of demands that they want to say in order for a ceasefire to be reached, because it's funny. It is funny what they think that they can achieve.
Maybe we'll end on this. Just to show people how unserious Iran is about ending the conflict, their list of demands to the United States, it gets funnier by the week. It started with, we want compensation. Then they added in, we want Trump to publicly admit that he was defeated. Then they added to that, we want an apology letter from Trump. And the third thing they said, we want Christmas to come early this year. They didn't really say that, but it gets that absurd. It's all of that is just to say, we're winning, you're losing. We're winning, we're losing. And the problem is people around the world don't have the patience to dive into the details.
Exactly.
That's why we're here, to tell people that on the ground, the trend is overwhelmingly in the favor of the United States and Israel and against the Iranian regime. They're in their death throes, but as you said very correctly, Yael, dictatorships don't go quietly. They always go with a splash. Let's wrap up Iran.
And I have a question that I think take us to the next part, and this is why the Arab states around Iran so scared from the IRGC, and why they not really in favor of the U.S. right now. We're seeing Saudi making a deal with Turkey and Afghanistan, and on the other hand, we see the Emiratis starting to fight by themselves.
Pakistan,
sorry. And we see the Emiratis getting hit again by Iran, and there is no any answer from the U.S. by a military attack or something like that. So why it is so terrifying, and why Turkey is part of this whole story?
Well, maybe Turkey is the answer to the question of what's happening to Iran. Because when Iran is weakened, they had a web throughout the Middle East. They were the power behind Hezbollah, Lebanon. They were the power behind weakening the Syrian regime, at least to a certain degree. They had a substantial presence on the ground there. They had a power in Iraq, they had power in the Gaza Strip. When they evacuated much of that power, we're talking more than a year ago, not just now.
Yeah.
There's never a vacuum left in the Middle East, anywhere in the world. Someone always steps in, and the person to immediately step into this, and they tried to do this repeatedly, going back even to Sharm el-Sheikh, when there was the summit trying to talk about how we're going to rebuild the Gaza Strip and all that jazz back in the day. Turkey is first in line to say, if there's a question of who wants to fill the spot, we're them.
Yeah.
They carry the same crazy ideology, and by crazy I mean radical end times, radical Islamic ideology. We're talking about bringing the end of the world.
So why are they not working with Iran together?
Because they're in competition.
Exactly.
Turkey and Iran are in competition. And by the way, Turkey...
It's a different of religion?
It's different streams within Islam, which are very different religions. Shia Islam, Sunni Islam. Iran is the flag bearer of Shia Islam, a very specific sect in it. It's called the 12th Imam. I don't want to get into it.
Don't get into that.
I won't get into it. It essentially just means we're willing to watch the world burn in order to usher in our version of the Messiah end times. That's in a nutshell. And what they do, what seems illogical to us, makes sense to them from a religious perspective. Erdogan in Turkey holds an almost parallel ideology, but in a different version of Sunni Islam. Where they talk about the lost Mahdi, the lost Imam. It's this whole, again, very different type of Islam, but that acts in a similar way. We want to be an empire again. We want to be the flag bearers of this flavor of Islam. We want to be the ones who bring destruction and death to others and gain power and strength in the process. That's what they try to do.
Yeah, and they want to be the gateway to Europe and the controllers and the strong player in the Middle East at the same time. And
how they do that?
We are seeing now, just a few days ago, that the IDF conducted an aerial strike inside Syria in order to prevent Turkey from establishing military presence with anti-aerial defensive systems that might jeopardize the ability of the Israeli Air Force to have freedom of operation above the skies of Syria, Iraq, and basically prevent us from having a free passage to striking against Iran, against Iranian militias in Iraq, or against Syria itself. So we want to talk about this, but first I want to give a little shout out to the Israel Paratroopers Fund, Mati. They're a great organization here in Israel, all volunteers. So for generations, Israel's paratroopers have stood on the front lines, defending the people of Israel, the land of Israel, and the home that God promised us, this people. And even now, as the war continues, Israel's paratroopers are still fighting on many fronts. They leave behind wives, children, and families, and step towards the danger to protect this nation. So every paratrooper, basically every IDF soldier also, but we need to know one thing, that if the worst comes, that our wife and the children will not be left alone. So that's why the Paratroopers Families Fund exists. And the name in Hebrew is called Achaverim Shel Abba, Dad's Friends.
That's friends. I like that.
That's a great name.
Yeah.
And for more than 50 years, this fund has provided long-term, ongoing support for the widows, for the orphans of the fallen paratroopers. It's not a one-time help, but standing commitment. So each family is assisted with a personal liaison from the paratroopers brigade. Widows and children take part in retreats, trips, and activities throughout the year. And children are guided from childhood into their own military service, and then even beyond. So this organization is doing amazing work. I've been there personally with Tomer, talking to one widow, one orphan that is part of this project, and it's life-changing, really. What's nice about it is that all the people that are part of this organization are volunteers. They're all from the paratroopers brigade. They give from their time, from their money, in order to help those that need it most. So it's nice, really nice to know that the friends of Dad, and now it's also the friends of the grandparents, because some of them are from the 6-Day War, paratroopers from that time that are still involved. It's 50 years. So if you want to donate and help the widows and the orphans of the IDF soldiers that lost their lives, go to idfairborne.org. Again, that's idfairborne.org. Now let's get back to Syria, Mati. Because, wait, before I want to drop another bomb here about Syria, Mati, because this is very, very cool stuff. Does the Syrian president, a former Al-Qaeda member, ISIS affiliated organization, does he have nuclear materials now? Because that's a new thing that was revealed.
Well, did he ever not have nuclear materials? I think we forgot Israel back in the day.
2007. Yeah.
2007.
We bombed
The hell out of them.
Well, we bombed a nuclear enrichment facility, nuclear reactor.
Well, looks like we do it a lot in
within
the Middle East.
We're the only ones who've done it.
Yeah.
But we need to credit the Israeli Air Force for this and several Israeli prime ministers. We stopped the Iraqi nuclear program multiple times, by the way. One of them ended in us blowing up a reactor in Iraq, but we also previously sabotaged a reactor that was on the way in France before that, and threatened the governments and other individuals allegedly who were planning to sell them reactors. We did the same for Syria. We stopped their nuclear reactor. It's a crazy, and during Assad's regime, crazy story about how
he was supported by Iran also. That was an Iranian project back then.
I don't think it was Iranian.
It was
North Korean.
North Korea and Iran.
All the
built the
axis of
facilities.
evil, all the good guys together.
Mount of evil.
All the good guys. I think if I remember correctly,
with weird dresses.
If I remember correctly, Assad got the nuclear reactor, I'm guessing with the help of Iran, but it was from North Korea.
The
technology and the scientists were North Korea.
from North Korea.
And Israel bombed this reactor. And then you ask yourself the question, well, did anyone ever go in and remove all the enriched material? I don't think that ever happened.
Yeah, because now in our days, we talk a lot about the fact that the United States destroyed the nuclear facilities, but nobody went inside to actually collect the enriched uranium.
I will check how much they have.
So that's a new topic that is being discussed now. So most likely Syria has some enriched uranium or other materials that can help in produce a nuclear bomb in the future. And you don't want these materials to be in the hands of a former ISIS leader.
I have to ask you a question. I become ever increasing
tons of
how much?
Tons.
No, but not to a high level, a low level enrichment. Think about this for a second. Who's releasing this information? We need to be very, very suspicious in this season right now in who's releasing the information to the press. And you need to really think about it. My guess would be that the entity that would benefit most from exposing to the world that the Syrian government has enriched material and is planning to work towards it, and that somehow is connected to Turkey, it wouldn't be the United States, it wouldn't be Syria, and it wouldn't be Turkey. Maybe it would be a different country that is also in the Middle East. Fill in the blanks. Not Iran either.
Starts with E.
So it starts with an I, ends with an Israel. Anyway, but I don't say this jokingly. I say you really have to think for a second about who's talking about these topics, who's raising this information. It's like many people were surprised when we talked about Pickaxe Mountain in Iran. We're like, wait a minute, where was this previously? Everyone had the information. It's just sometimes you need to push the public agenda so people understand the urgency in dealing with it.
Yeah, you can't also release all the information at once because then everything
gets lost in the news.
It gets lost in the news cycle.
The news cycle right now was, look, great things are happening in Syria. Ashara, look at him. He combed his beard and he's wearing a suit. He must be one of the good guys. That's like Western logic. Then they have a picture of him
playing basketball.
Yeah, he's playing basketball. Trump says this guy's amazing, and then suddenly we.
How many wives do you have? Yeah. Remember these conversations at the White House?
Yeah, here's Trump perfume. And
several tons of nuclear material to a mid-level.
Yeah, I mean that is cause for concern.
That's
But
a cause
the
for-
real point. The real point here is what are the powers that are being shaped in the Middle East, and Syria is the testing grounds of a power shift that's taking place, in which Israel. Well, this is not true. Before this war even started, thankfully the Assad regime fell, and it fell due to the work of Ashara, formerly known as Julani, formerly known as the singer as Prince. I'm just kidding, but you know,
It
again,
happened because of us.
we helped. Israel helped, but also Russia helped. Anyway,
Well, they've been in a Syrian civil war for more
10
than
years,
10
more
years.
than a
like
decade.
Tomer. It's not
the
like
moment,
only
the
us.
moment that we hit Hezbollah, there wasn't a military force to help Assad stay in control.
Yeah,
But
but even before that, 70% of the country
Yeah,
was
yeah.
not under his control because
Assad
he already lost everything
he only
but
controlled
Damascus.
the big
Yeah.
cities, and even then only part of the areas because Russia had an enclave within it, and in the eastern part of the country there were different militias that controlled it. Anyway, the point is the regime fell, and then we're trying to build up something new. The United States looked at Ashara and said, look, this is the guy we're going to rebuild the Middle East with. And Israel gave a nuanced answer. Israel didn't say, absolutely not. We said, we like the idea of rebuilding Syria, but we're concerned about this guy. This guy, Ashara.
We don't know him.
Just recently, well, we do know him. We know
don't
him
know
as
his
this.
future intentions.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly. We know him as this guy wearing
Yeah.
capes and having the flag of Daesh, ISIS behind him and chanting, death to Israel with his supporters.
Yeah, not a friend.
Yeah, exactly.
essentially.
Also, his name El Julani is like from the
Golan,
Golan,
the Golan,
And it's
meaning
changing
for
that.
his
it's
intentions
changing that
to
only
reconquer the
moment that
Israeli
he's
Golan
becoming-
Heights.
He's changing that only the moment that he's becoming a president. Until then, he's Asara. He have a whole different name that meaning a whole different thing.
Yeah.
So again, this guy who has a very unknown, as you say, as an unknown future to him, he's propped up as like the future of the Syrian people. But Syria is an independent in this. Syria starts building a network of the countries backing it financially, the countries backing it militarily, and the network that's going to stabilize their place in the Middle East as it relates to Iran, as it relates to Israel from their perspective, as it relates to Hezbollah, Lebanon, and others. And Turkey enters into that conversation and very strongly inserts itself into what's happening in Syria. What you mentioned at the beginning of this block is insanity when you think about geopolitics. Turkey starts positioning weapons and the people operating those weapon systems inside a neighboring country to Israel. The kind of weapon systems, air defense systems, that will jeopardize Israeli aircraft. And they're not doing that for the fun of it. And they're not doing it because they wanted to dust off their missiles. They're doing it to harm Israel and Israeli interest in the Middle East. And Israel looks at this, and I can guarantee all of us that there was an exchange of classified messages before this attack took place, saying to the Turks, we know what you're doing, we're not allowing it, stop. Then it came with a dir balak, which is be careful afterwards in Arabic.
Or if.
Or else.
Or else.
Or else.
Yeah.
And they ignored it. They ignored the or else and said, what are you going to do? And we showed them what we're going to do. We bombed what they were doing.
Yeah, so basically, Israel launched an aerial strike this week against Turkish military targets inside Syria. That's what happened.
Yeah.
And this is happening while there were lots of talks about the potential removal of the IDF from key positioning in Syria, because Syria is a moderate country now. So we should move the IDF from the Hermon mountain, from the strategic buffer zone that is protecting us, and also the Druze and other minorities in Syria. So this is proof that Syria is not a free, peaceful neighbor to Israel. And now the headlines are showing strikes against Turkish involvement inside Syria that might prevent Israel from having its aerial superiority over this country.
Let's talk about the United States in this context.
They didn't say anything about that, right? They said a little bit that this was an unnecessary escalation. I heard that statement from Tom Barak, the envoy to the Middle East.
But again, it depends who you're listening to.
Exactly.
Let's call it the big U.S. government. The White House didn't really say anything
Like
substantial.
Trump,
Yeah.
Vance, and
And you need
Pete.
to look at this. They've been looking at Syria as a project in which they're going to rebuild American hegemony or American control, American strength in the Middle East at the expense of Iran. And Turkey looks at this from the side and becomes a problematic friend to the United States. They, on the one hand, want to cooperate with the United States, and the U.S. wants a partner in Turkey. They don't want an enemy of Turkey. But at the same time, they have to deal with the fact that their other big ally in the region, Israel, a far more militarily successful ally, let's put it this way, than the Turks, says to any Turkish presence in this region, absolutely not. Let me remind people why. Turkey exports terrorism to Israel. And by exports terrorism, I don't mean this as a euphemism. This isn't ideology. They're not sending out pamphlets saying, we don't like Israeli policy, we suggest people vote against them. No. They are paying and funding terrorist organizations that send ships full of terrorists towards the Israeli coast to with weapons, to quote unquote liberate the people of Gaza, also known by the exact definition of clash with the Israeli Navy while they try to violate our sovereignty of our coastal borders.
Yeah.
And this is the government we're dealing with. We're dealing with a government that threatens to assassinate Israeli representatives, that said they'll shoot down the planes of Netanyahu or of our president, Herzog. This is the guy we're dealing with, and a man who, again, if you ever think that this is a political debate or a legitimate criticism or critique of Israeli policies and Israeli government, just Google Erdogan speaks about Israel. Look at the way that man's face contorts, and just think of other characters in Israel that get red in the face and start moving their hands, shaking violently, yelling in a language you don't understand, to understand what this man is motivated by and what his ideology is. It's a evil, I'm going to say demonic because it is. It's a deep hatred of the Jewish people and of Israel that comes from a religious belief and from a deep-rooted anti-Semitic agenda in his mind that causes him to clash with every Israeli leader over the past almost 20 years, repeatedly, including Shimon Peres, who was not a very peaceful, he was a very peaceful individual, publicly, in his later years, in his later years as president.
I think the reason that all these leaders are choosing very difficult names is because it's very hard to Google them. Like Pazakhshian, how do you spell that? Erdogan, how do you spell that, Mati? It's very hard to say. So it's like, I think you can say Turkish president, and then you can get the images of these videos.
But we need to make the point. This is what's happening here. And people don't understand. They look at just the isolated event and said, oh, look, Israel's carrying out an act of aggression in Syria. Shame on Israel. Such an aggressor. And people are like, I say to them, read the news. What's happening behind this?
People read...
They only headlines. Only the headlines. That's the problem.
Behind that headline of Israel strikes in Syria, Syria says, this was a gross violation of our sovereignty. Did you not think to say that about the Turkish army placing troops and munitions within your country? Is that not too a violation of your sovereignty? And to that, they have nothing to say. Suddenly, they're quiet. It's all crickets on that topic. People need to understand what's happening here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a
this is a good time to shift to what's happening in the Gaza Strip. And before that, Tomer, maybe it's a good thing to tell our viewers that we are TBN Israel. And if you want to help us reach more people around the world, you can hit the subscribe button. You can share this video. You can like and leave a comment. Let me know if you like this discussion, if you have any topics you want us to discuss in our next Boots on the Ground weekly panel. And also look us up on our social media platforms. This guy here, this guy, maybe the camera can show him. Hello. That's Mati Shoshani. I'm Yair Pinto. And you can Google us on our social media accounts to see life in Israel. Also like the good stuff, the fun stuff. We like to eat a lot, do sports. Mati more than me. And
both of them, sadly. I both like eating more than you and exercising more.
Definitely. So now let's move to the Gaza Strip, okay? Because
let's connect between Lebanon and Gaza. I think it's the same story.
Okay, yeah. Basically, we have been talking about ceasefires, Trump peace plan for more than a year now, since the hostages came back. Hamas was defeated. But then what's happening on the ground? Because we know that Hamas has basically regained its control inside the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
Using the
40%.
humanitarian aid.
A portion of it.
40% of the Gaza Strip.
No, if you're talking about territory, you're right. But Hamas is the sole ruler of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. No other entity is ruling that.
Can we give an Israeli perspective for a second?
Yeah.
The Israeli public is deeply alarmed and concerned about what's happening in the Gaza Strip. That's the Israeli headline. for the perspective of the Israeli public, we are watching images that were seen before October the 7th.
Yes.
We're watching parades of Hamas marching in the streets of Gaza, uninterrupted by anyone else, of them killing people in the streets of Gaza once more to assert their dominance.
Their own people.
Their own
The
people, of course.
Palestinian people, yeah.
Of them testing the border with Israel time and time again, of diplomatic pressure telling Israel not to engage directly with Hamas. And, this is an important one, of an international force setting up in the Gaza Strip. And Israeli public looks at all of this with extreme concern, extreme alarm, to a degree that is unheard in any other topic when it comes to defense on our borders in recent months. The Israeli social media has been flooded with messages of individuals, including high-ranking politicians, that are saying that what's happening in Gaza is an emergency call for Israeli change of policy and an emergency call in the Israeli public to understand that something extreme is happening here and we need to engage.
But
now we can talk about the international perspective.
Let's talk about the demilitarization.
Well,
It's a hard word.
okay. Demilitarization, huh? How is that?
I'll ask Yair the
was
question. Yair, what was supposed to happen in Gaza after the treaty was signed for the disarmament of the Hamas organization?
Well, after the treaty was signed for the ceasefire agreement in Gaza, Hamas was, first of all, supposed to disarm of its weapons. Then a technocratic Palestinian government, meaning like a professional government of Palestinians, should have taken the control
I have a
and
question.
managed life in Gaza.
Did they disarm?
No.
Okay.
So
Will they disarm?
First step was supposed to disarm. Then international international technocratic government of Palestinians was supposed to take control. Then an international
Follow-up question.
community.
Did that happen?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Third, an international military or forces were supposed to come and make sure that Hamas or other terrorist elements do not retake control of the Gaza Strip. Did that happen?
It's
no.
happening now.
Slowly, we see images
so that's why
of
Kushner came to Israel.
African soldiers coming into the Gaza Strip, flying towards Israel.
And American, they're not soldiers, American contractors.
Yes.
That's called what they are.
Exactly. So it's kind of like we're starting
What do you want to say,
from
Tomer?
the end and not from the
Tomer
first.
has suspicious now.
I'm just saying that Bibi and Kushner just had 4 hours of talks, and the peace comedy is saying,
He's a terrorist. He's a terrorist.
this is a
Terrorist
terrorist
leader.
organization.
Yeah.
The IDF will not move from the Gaza Strip and Hamas will give up his weapons. And that's the point that we're standing now. And it's the same thing that's supposed to happen, and Lebanon saying to Hezbollah, that's the time to disarm. And that's the same ask from the U.S. of Iraqi and other militias to disarm. How you disarm those organizations, even Kalibaf, I have a problem with the names, even that I write them 10 times.
Galibaf. It depends how
Galibaf, the Iranian one said, we are controlling what happened with Hezbollah right now on the border with Lebanon and Israel on the fight. And same thing happening with Iran, and as much as they can, it's much more harder, and Hamas. So, and we see Turkey supporting Hamas right now on the other end. So how are we disarming them? How that gonna happen?
That's a good question. So I
can
think
leave
that
that
we won't be able to disarm a terrorist organization willingly. I don't think that Hamas has the intention to just give up its weapons.
So
The only option that is visible is that the IDF will resume the operations inside the Gaza Strip to dismantle Hamas surgically. And there were some plans for that, Mati. I know you say that this is very, very hard to do, but there were some plans of like creating green cities in southern parts of the Gaza Strip and then moving in the Palestinian population, scanning, making sure that there are no weapons, making sure that there are no Hamas operatives and no terrorists inside these cities, and then helping and starting the rebuilding process.
I have a problem with this entire conversation.
Yeah.
Knowing what we know about how easy it is to smuggle weapons, okay? Again, Israeli perspective, the Israeli perspective is it's now, you can use drones, just large commercial drones, to drop 30 assault rifles like this. And when you have money, and Iran has money, and when you have a will, and Iran and Hamas have a will, it's not that hard, even when you have a green zone or whatever you want to call the zone, a demilitarized zone, to get in weapons into that area. And the problem is, Hamas, what makes a Hamas terrorist is not the fact that he has a weapon. What makes him a terrorist is that he's a radicalized individual who's willing to kill on behalf of that ideology. And because of that, all he needs to carry out that is any type of weapon. It's a knife to hurt his own countrymen. It's a rifle that he'll get, and it's not that hard to get, to attack an IDF post. And later on, it's heavy machinery to dig tunnels and attack. And to understand really the end of all these conversations always has to be replace the regime. As long as Hamas is in control of the Gaza Strip, there will forever be an armed conflict with him. There's no other way to say this.
Well, that's the only thing that they know. That's the only thing that they know. We need to stop thinking at Hamas, this terrorist organization, as a humanitarian organization, as a government, or anything else, but a body that seeks to destroy Israel and the Western society around the world, not just Israel.
Can I just say, I'll make a big picture statement here. People make these isolated comments and isolated solutions. They think tactically. All we need to do is just take the guns from Hamas, take the weapons from Hezbollah, and you solve the problem. You don't understand how things work in this part of the world or in general. What makes terrorists successful is not the weapons they have, it's their desire to kill and the willingness for themselves to lose their lives in the process. That's what makes them terrorists. It's not the gun that they have. They'll get a different gun. And because
throw a rock.
and this
stick.
idea,
Exactly.
Again, what Tomer is saying, in the headlines throughout the Middle East, if you read and follow also Arabic news outlets, in Iraq, the government there is calling on the Shia militias and all militias to be disarmed. Why? Because there's a deadline where the United States is supposed to withdraw from the country till the end of this month, withdraw their forces, and they're deeply concerned about the fact that they're going to have a militia war on their hands, and they're saying we want to disarm people. It's not working. The same applies to Syria and whatever rebel factions exist there, pro-government or anti-government. Same applies to Hezbollah, same applies to Hamas. The only thing that really makes a dramatic change is creating a stable government or stable, let's call it entity or autonomy, that is able to protect its own people from outside violence and prevent its people from inside violence. By the way, when you study international relations or politics, the definition of a country is, you remember this?
Yeah.
The monopoly of violence.
Yeah.
It's
the
being
ability
able
to extract the violence.
I love monopoly of violence.
And it sounds philosophical to people. It isn't. It's the ability to prevent others from attacking your people, and the ability to prevent your own people from attacking each other. And
to enforce the laws of the country.
That's the bedrock of civilization, in a sense, is having a set of rules. And we keep going back to these conversations of all it takes for Gaza is just take the guns. No, it's not. It's removing Hamas. That's what it takes. It's removing Hamas from Gaza.
Yeah. Also, it will take, I think, a whole generation of better education.
Yeah.
I want to show
the new
to our
people
viewers
there.
something. Mati, I will put it on a video from Lebanon where the terrorist soldiers of Hezbollah, soldier, I don't know how to call them, of Hezbollah been hidden or stuck under IDF Caesar for almost 2 months now. In what's the name of the place, Yair?
Ali Tahir Ridge.
Thank you. Ali Tahir.
That place.
I don't know who Ali Tahir is, but we talk about him a lot.
Yeah.
So I will put a video now. Mati, if you can, it's in Hebrew, so if you can
I'll
translate.
So we have full control of the underground space. What we're looking for is this. Everything that can harm our troops. First thing is IEDs. This is anti-aircraft machine gun belts, charges. This is gear for an infantry unit, the helmets, the plate carriers. This is from Radwan Force, which is an elite Hezbollah force. In this tunnel, they found a bunch of Iranian infrastructure. Almost everything aside from a OR room. A lot of medical treatment. This is the kind of tunnel and infrastructure that can hold hundreds for months. It even has a dental clinic inside of the tunnel. There's an operating room that can take care of people that are injured. There are rooms that people can stay. Every room has a kitchen connected to it, a bathroom connected to it. It had all the weaponry, all the people, all the infrastructure needed to really carry a war against Israel over a prolonged time period.
That's it. So
many scooters and a bunch of other things.
And it's keep going and going and going. people don't even imagine when we talk about terrorist organization, what is the size and what is
The scope, yeah.
yeah, of what it is and what they can do. And this is sitting on our border. That's
Yeah, well, that's the reason why the IDF needs to remain in South Lebanon until the Lebanese National Army is strong enough to do it themselves. But it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. And the fact that the international community is like saying, withdraw your forces from Lebanon, okay, and then what? And then you have terrorists within a week or a day back in the same places.
Yeah, and I think that the big challenge here is that stability is a chain reaction. It's not a singular event. In the sense that for Lebanon, I'll present people the story that's being told. The story is this. Look, we're rebuilding Lebanon, and we're going to give money to the Lebanese government, Joseph Aoun. We're going to give money to him. There's a new army. It's the Lebanese Armed Forces. We're going to fund them. We're going to train them. We're going to protect them. We'll do a pilot where they try to fill the shoes or the positions of the IDF, and then the IDF can withdraw,
Gradually.
repeat,
Yeah.
and then you repeat the process time and time again. But in reality, that doesn't really work, and I'll explain why. It only works when Lebanon as a country is stabilized. And right now, Lebanon is not a stable country. And more importantly, also their neighbors are not stable countries. And because of that, because you have Syria next door, let's play the game. Here's the war game. Lebanon, let's say their army in a miraculous turn of events, fights and starts mobilizing and pushes Hezbollah forces north and east and north and east and north and east. What ultimately happens? Hezbollah leaves the territory of Lebanon and they go hide elsewhere.
Where will they go?
They'll go to Syria. And if they don't stay in Syria because the Syrian government prevents it, then they'll find a convoy and they'll find a way to Iraq until things settle down. We've seen this happen throughout history.
Oh, Jordan.
Yeah, time and time again. It's regional stability that allows a true in-depth solution. And I don't say this to discourage. I say this because this is what the United States and Israel are working towards, is full comprehensive solutions. And I want to say this again. Bombing is the easy part.
Yeah,
Rebuilding is the
exactly.
hard part. That's the hard part. Historically speaking, creating an act of stabilizing a region, especially when a government has been broken for many, many years or generations at this point, is hugely difficult. That's the truth. Rebuilding when Hezbollah has spent, decades embedding itself into the population and building weaponry, it's really hard to do that. You need to change the mindset of the people. You need to convince the people of Lebanon that Hezbollah isn't coming back.
Yeah.
That's a high thing to sell.
Let's take us back
because
to
if
history
they come
to our
back,
next topic.
they come back stronger
To take
and
revenge.
more ruthless.
They come back to take revenge. It's a very tricky situation, and people we like taking cheap shots at the Lebanese government. The Lebanese government, the people leading that government, have seen their predecessors assassinated by Hezbollah. Okay, that's the political reality they live in. They've seen their families kidnapped by Hezbollah. They've seen their soldiers killed by Hezbollah in Hezbollah territory because their soldiers dared to try to enforce the policy of their government. That's the reality we're living in. It's very complex.
And
Let's go to a very nice ending to this show because we want to keep it on the positive side. And I
let's
think
go
that
back to history.
I want to go back to history. I want to go back to
Bible.
an archaeological finding that Mati just visited in the Israel Museum here in Jerusalem. Maybe you can elaborate about a specific scroll.
I heard you listening to ChatGPT explaining the biblical scroll before.
Yeah, I know,
so
but I think the first-hand experience is a bit better.
I'll tell you,
because-
I got to see. So there's the Qumran scrolls, which are scrolls found in the 40s, 50s in the Judean desert, that many of them date back biblical text. One of those texts is the full book of Isaiah. In the old... Again, Shayo, Isaiah. In its fullest form ever found. What it proved, by the way, was the accuracy of the text, because there was always a debate of when the text was written. This shows that the text was written well before the first century, possibly almost hundreds of years before the first century. It depends who you're asking and who you're debating. The scroll found there is usually kept in a underground bunker, outside of sunlight for a very short period of time. I think it ends next month.
It was brought up.
in September. It was brought and made public So you can see the
I will put
scroll
the-
of Isaiah. It is, and I say this, one, I'm a sucker for sentimental things in history, but it was emotionally and spiritually moving to be so close to something so ancient that is so powerful in its text. And when you read the text, and the Israel Museum did an amazing job. We filmed there for an upcoming episode of Insight Season 4 that's coming up late this year on TBN, and then to digital after that. You get to see the text highlighted, first person, and in it you get and receive context to what we're doing in the world and what we're experiencing in the world. The problems we're dealing with in Israel right now have been foretold biblically. They've happened before. The enemies.
I think it's connected.
It's very connected.
It's really funny that this is the year that they're showing the Ishayahu scroll, because it's really connected to the wars that we have now.
Yeah,
It's the same time. It's the same story.
It talks of enemies coming from afar, laying siege to your cities. It talks of God sending a message of compassion, a message of comfort to the people. It calls to a message of repentance and changing of the ways and the mindset of the Jewish people, as relevant today as it was when the text was written several millennia ago. And in that sense, I found it to be a super powerful experience. And I think, and I said this to people, so the news is not enough. Read the book of Isaiah. Read the words of God spoken through the prophets to the people of Israel in the past. Words of judgment, but also words of comfort. Words of exile, but also words of return. Words of banishment and fear and pain, but words of supernatural restoration in the land and supernatural, godly ordained victory over countless enemies. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
It is familiar.
It is. It kind of repeats itself.
It's familiar now as it was back in the days of the kings of old. And in that sense, I found it to be a beautiful, beautiful story that connects the ancient to the present day and also gives us perspective.
What do you feel when you saw the scroll? That's the first time they showing the
It was my
copy
first
on
time seeing the original
original.
scroll in person, because the last time it was shown was well before I was born.
Yeah.
Like 15 years before I was born. It gives you a lot of perspective. A perspective to see that God has been faithful to the Jewish people and to the land of Israel and to this city, the city of Jerusalem, that is complex and problematic and intense and angry, but also unique, supernatural, or godly, divine, godly ordained, and prophesied of in countless books throughout holy text. And in that sense, it gives you a big picture of what's really happening in the world. That the fears that were relevant to the people of Israel in the northern kingdom, in the southern kingdom, in the unified kingdom, they were valid fears back then, but God came through in a way that they didn't see. The fears we had in Israel, fears of Hezbollah, fears of Iran, fears of our enemy, fears of international isolation, of hatred of the Jews, they're valid fears. But the big picture plays in our favor and plays according to God's plan time and time again. And when I read that, it gives me context. And I say this every time we have this conversation. You really can't look at the world only through one prism. It can't just be news. It can't just be a sensation. It can't just be, what I feel about this topic. You must be grounded. By the way, we're called to be grounded. Grounded in God's word, in Holy Scripture, and grounded in prayer, grounded in understanding and engagement in the world around us. And that's the trifecta effect. It's having biblical scripture to inform your worldview, understanding what's happening in the world around us with help of channels such as TBN Israel, our channel, like and subscribe, as we say.
If you haven't so far.
and living a life of spiritual significance, of praying through these things, of meditating on these things to see the pattern in that thing. This last weekend, and I'll end my rant on this topic, I taught in our congregation, Yair.
Yes, it is.
I'm teaching from 1 Chronicles 3, and it talks about the history of the house of David. And then I went through, you would have heard me talk about these things in the past, about all the evidence of the house of David. And then you see something that is spoken about, again, hundreds of years after King David has already lived, died, and his descendants have already left the face of the earth. This is the people returning to the land in the Second Temple period, which was a very dark period in the history of this land and the nation here, talking about what God had promised to King David and his descendants, and we get to see that faithfulness come through even today. of a supernatural restoration of the house of David through Christ, by the way, through Yeshua, through Jesus, but also more importantly, everything else that's said, the city of Jerusalem, the kingdom in this land, the people returning, it all happened.
The language, the culture, everything.
It goes on and on and on and on. We could talk for hours about this topic. And in that sense, Tomo, to your question, it gives you perspective, and perspective gives you peace. Perspective gives you the ability to put your hands around behind your head and say, I don't know what the solution is. I don't know what the answer is. I know God's been faithful time and time again in history. And if he's done it before, he'll do it again.
He'll do it again, yeah. I think that what I like most about situations that we don't have the answers to is that the only solution is to have complete faith in God and not in our abilities to solve it ourselves. And I think that's a good place to be in, trusting in God wholehearted.
Amen to that.
So this was very fun, Mati. See you again. I think later on today for another report. It's good to see you again, Tomer, in person, really in the flesh. All of you, thank you for joining us here on TBN Israel for this Boots on the Ground report. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, really, because 50% of you are not subscribers. So you're watching, but you're not subscribing. Just get up the couch and hit the subscribe button. It really helps us. Okay? And keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel.